On a dark and stormy night, the rain poured down in sheets, creating a symphony of sound as it drummed against the windows of my small, creaky apartment. I was alone, trying to find solace in the soft glow of the television, but the storm outside was relentless. The howling wind and the flickering lights only added to the eerie atmosphere. It was the perfect setting for a nightmarish tale, and I was about to live through one. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, was an elderly woman who lived alone. She was a kind soul, always offering me freshly baked cookies and stories from her youth. Despite her age, she was sprightly and independent, never one to ask for help. But that night, something felt different. I could sense it in the air, a palpable tension that seemed to seep through the walls. I was about to go to bed when I heard a faint knock on my door. It was so quiet that at first I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again, slightly louder and more insistent. I opened the door to find Mrs. Thompson standing there, drenched from head to toe, her eyes wide with fear. "Please come in," I said, quickly ushering her inside and wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What happened?" She looked at me with a mixture of relief and terror. "It's my husband," she whispered. I was taken aback. I had always known Mrs. Thompson to be a widow. "Your husband? But I thought—" "I know what you thought," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "But he's back. He's come back for me." Chills ran down my spine. "What do you mean? How is that possible?" Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath and began her story. "My husband, George, passed away 20 years ago, but tonight I saw him. I saw him standing outside my window, just staring at me with those cold, dead eyes. I didn't know what to say. It sounded impossible, like something out of a horror movie, but the fear in her eyes was real, and it made my blood run cold. "Please, you have to come with me," she pleaded. "I can't go back there alone." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We grabbed flashlights and umbrellas and made our way through the torrential rain to her apartment. The wind howled around us, and the lightning illuminated the path in sporadic, blinding flashes. When we reached her apartment, I noticed that the front door was ajar. I hesitated, but Mrs. Thompson pushed it open and stepped inside. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. We made our way to the living room, where Mrs. Thompson pointed to the window. "He was standing right there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I shone my flashlight at the window, but there was nothing there, just the rain pounding against the glass. "Maybe it was just your imagination," I suggested, trying to calm her down. But she shook her head vehemently. "No, I know what I saw. He's here. I can feel it." Just then, a loud crash sounded from the bedroom. We both jumped, our flashlights wavering as we turned towards the noise. Mrs. Thompson grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. "Please, let's just leave," I urged her. "We can call the police." But she shook her head. "No, we have to face him. We have to put an end to this." With a sense of dread, I followed her to the bedroom. The door was slightly open, and I could see shadows moving inside. My heart raced as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. There, standing in the middle of the room, was a figure cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, just as Mrs. Thompson had described. I felt a scream rise in my throat, but it got stuck there, paralyzed by fear. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "George, you need to leave. You don't belong here anymore." The figure turned towards her, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in its eyes. But then it vanished, disappearing into thin air as if it had never been there at all. We stood there in stunned silence, the only sound the pounding of the rain against the windows. Mrs. Thompson turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." We left the apartment and returned to mine, both of us shaken but relieved. Mrs. Thompson stayed with me that night, and we sat by the fire, grateful to be safe and sound. But deep down, I knew that the memory of that shocking and scary night would haunt us for years to come. On a dark and stormy night, the rain poured down in sheets, creating a symphony of sound as it drummed against the windows of my old, reliable pickup truck. I was driving down a desolate stretch of highway, the road illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional flash of lightning. The wind howled around me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the perfect setting for a nightmarish tale, and I was about to become a part of one. I was heading home after a long day at work, eager to get back to the warmth and comfort of my own bed. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The road was eerily empty, and the storm seemed to be getting worse by the minute. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, drenched from head to toe, their thumb outstretched in a classic hitchhiker's gesture. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with warnings and cautionary tales. But the figure looked so desperate, and I couldn't just leave them there in the pouring rain. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I called out. The figure nodded and climbed into the passenger seat, their clothes soaked and clinging to their skin. They were young, maybe in their early 20s, with wide, frightened eyes. "Thank you," they said, their voice barely audible over the sound of the storm. "I've been out here for hours. My car broke down, and I didn't know what to do." I nodded, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "No problem. Where are you headed?" "Just up the road," they replied. "My house is about 15 miles from here." I nodded again and started driving, the tension in the cab palpable. We made small talk for a few miles, but the hitchhiker seemed distracted, their eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror. "Is everything okay?" I asked, glancing over at them. They hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, it's just, I feel like we're being followed." I laughed nervously. "Followed? By who?" They shook their head. "I don't know. It's just a feeling." I glanced in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing but the dark, rain-soaked road behind us. "I don't see anything," I said, trying to sound reassuring. But the hitchhiker's unease was contagious, and I found myself checking the mirror more and more frequently. The storm seemed to be getting worse, and the road was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Just as we were approaching a particularly sharp turn, I saw a flash of headlights in the rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice tense. "There's a car behind us." The hitchhiker's eyes widened, and they turned to look out the back window. "Oh no," they whispered. "It's him." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Him? Who's him?" They looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation. "The man who was following me. I thought I lost him, but he's back." I didn't know what to say. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control, and I felt a surge of panic. "What should we do?" "Just keep driving," they said, their voice trembling. "Don't stop." I nodded and pressed down on the gas pedal, my heart racing. The car behind us was getting closer, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. I could feel the hitchhiker's fear, and it only added to my own. We drove in silence, the tension in the cab thick enough to cut with a knife. The storm raged on around us, the wind howling and the rain pounding against the windows. The car behind us was relentless, its headlights never wavering. Just as I was about to lose hope, we saw a gas station up ahead. "There," the hitchhiker said, pointing. "Pull in there." I did as they said, pulling into the gas station and parking near the entrance. The car behind us followed, but instead of stopping, it drove past us and disappeared into the night. We sat there in stunned silence, the sound of the rain filling the cab. The hitchhiker let out a shaky breath and looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Thank you," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I nodded, my heart still racing. "You're welcome. Do you need any help getting home?" They shook their head. "No, I'll be fine from here. Thank you again." They climbed out of the truck and disappeared into the gas station, leaving me alone in the storm. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. The memory of that shocking and scary night would haunt me for years to come, but I was grateful to have made it through unscathed. On a dark and stormy night, the rain poured down in sheets, creating a symphony of sound as it drummed against the windows of the old, decrepit asylum. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, drawn to the mystery and history that clung to their walls. But this place was different. It had a reputation, a dark and terrifying history that sent shivers down my spine. I was part of a group of urban explorers, and we had decided to spend the night in the abandoned asylum, hoping to capture some evidence of the paranormal. It was a decision we would come to regret. We arrived at the asylum just as the storm was reaching its peak. The wind howled around us, and the lightning illuminated the crumbling building in eerie flashes. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We made our way inside, our flashlights casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The place was a maze of dark, narrow hallways and empty rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. The atmosphere was oppressive, and I could feel the weight of the building's history pressing down on me. We set up our equipment in what had once been the main lobby, a grand, decaying space that echoed with the ghosts of the past. As we began our investigation, the storm outside seemed to grow even more intense, the wind and rain lashing against the building with a fury that made me uneasy. Hours passed, and we captured nothing but the sound of the storm and the occasional creak of the building settling. I was beginning to think that the asylum's reputation was just a myth when we heard it, a faint, distant scream. We all froze, our eyes wide with fear. The scream echoed through the hallways, sending chills down my spine. "Did you hear that?" one of my friends whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, my heart racing. It sounded like it came from upstairs. We gathered our courage and made our way up the creaky staircase, our flashlights barely cutting through the darkness. The second floor was even more unsettling than the first, the air thick with an eerie silence. We followed the sound of the scream to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see flickering shadows inside. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was empty, but the atmosphere was thick with a sense of dread. I shone my flashlight around, trying to find the source of the scream, but there was nothing there. Just as I was about to leave, I saw it, a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. I felt a scream rise in my throat, but it got stuck there, paralyzed by fear. The figure was tall and thin, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It stood there, staring at us, and I felt a chill run down my spine. We all stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The figure took a step towards us, and I felt a surge of panic. "We need to get out of here," I whispered, my voice trembling. We turned and ran, the figure's footsteps echoing behind us. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind and rain pounding against the building with a fury that matched our fear. We raced down the stairs and out of the asylum, the figure close on our heels. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our cars, the storm still raging around us. We sat there, panting and shaking, the memory of that terrifying night etched into our minds. We never went back to the asylum, and we never spoke of that night again. But the memory of that shocking and scary experience would haunt us for years to come, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows.